About the recording of it and whether you're ready for us to start recording.
Oh, sorry. Good point. Yeah, if you could perhaps start the recording now. Yeah.
Okay.
Well remembered. Okay. Thank you. So perhaps if I could ask the council just to introduce themselves in however you wish to do it.
Well, I'm much as my name tag would otherwise say, I am still Mr. Collett of council, instructed by the local authority in this matter. I'm going to, as I did throughout the inquiry, I'm going to let all the members introduce themselves because it's going to be a lot easier on these kind of formats. So if I'm going to ask my team to introduce themselves, starting with Mrs. Luscombe, and then probably dealing with the people in immediate vicinity, and I'm sure they'll introduce themselves one by one and taking time. And then and I can remind people please to mute after they've introduced themselves, otherwise we will end up having to speak over each other. So, and I hope that your chimneys are safe, and good morning to Mrs. Jackett as well.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Michelle Luscombe. I'm Head of Strategy and Partnerships at Teignbridge District Council.
Good morning, I'm Rob Kelly. I'm a Senior Planner in the Local Plans team.
And good morning, I'm Trevor Shaw. I'm a Senior Planning Officer in the Local Plans team as well.
I'm Katie Owen. I'm one of the Senior Planners. I will just be observing today.
Okay, have we got anybody from the council who's planning to speak? No, that's fine. Then perhaps if we can move to the other parties here. I think we've got Mr. Somerville and Mr. Parker, haven't we? Perhaps if you could just introduce yourselves, thank you.
I'll go first. Yeah, Kevin Parker. Good morning, everyone. Group Master Planning Director at Redrow. So I'm representing Redrow and Blore primarily on the design side today, and Mark will cover planning.
Good morning, all. I'm Mark Somerville, Planning Director at Savills, acting jointly on behalf of Blore and Redrow.
Okay, thank you. And I think Councillor Taylor there, you've put your camera on and look as if you were intending to introduce yourself. So.
Yes, so Gary Taylor, I'm the portfolio holder, the executive member for planning. So just here really to observe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to introduce yourself? If you're just here observing, you don't have to, but you're welcome to if you want to. I presume not. Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much for that. Just briefly on the context and background, at the beginning of the agenda, we've set out quite a detailed sort of context and background for why we're here. But so I won't go over that in detail because actually that goes across quite a bit of the agenda of what we're going to speak about today anyway. But just basically to summarise that and I think it was right at the very first Matter 1 session, the legal compliance session, we identified what we felt was the need for sustainability appraisal of the two design codes themselves and potentially of any reasonable alternatives to those. We asked at that point the council to come back to us with some proposals for that, which thanks to them they did. And we've then had, over the course of several weeks, various exchanges of emails about those proposals. I think basically from our point of view as inspectors, we're content with the proposal in terms of the essay of the design code, which I'll just briefly touch on when we get to it under item 4 of the agenda, but did have concerns about the reasonable alternatives. And we thought rather than continuing this discussion by email, which often takes a long time and isn't the easiest way of talking about these things, we thought it was easiest to have this session. We also, Mr. Somerville and Mr. Parker, we knew you had an interest in this matter, and we also thought that this would be an opportunity for you to give any thoughts you had on it as well in that roundtable discussion, rather than us continuing with our email chat and then consulting you on it separately in writing. So that's the purpose of the today, and we aim that either by the end, either by at the end of this session, we can say, right, we're concluded this is what we think needs to be done, or we will go away and respond with our sort of view on what needs to be done in terms of essay very shortly thereafter. So I think that's basically the context and background. Is there anything from anybody on that? Any queries on that or points? No. Okay, that's great. Okay, then just as a bit of background, then we had as item 3, which was the progress on the proposed main modifications of the design codes, and that was in the light of discussions of the Matter 6 hearings. When we put this initially on the agenda, we hadn't at that point seen anything from the council proposals in that respect, but in response to the draft agenda, the council helpfully provided us with those, which I think they were circulated to Mr. Somerville and Mr. Park, I think with the clear note that we hadn't actually had the chance to look at them at that stage. We want the focus of today to be on the essay rather than more the soundness issues of what's in the design codes and the main modifications. So we weren't proposing to go through those. We've not finished sort of entirely looking at them either. So we weren't proposing to go through those in detail today, other than to say, obviously, when the essay of the design codes is carried out, it obviously needs to be carried out on what we've agreed is the main model. There's no point in carrying it out on a version of the design code that almost certainly won't be the design code in due course. So it was just to say that. In terms of the detailed points in the main modifications, I don't know, Mr. Somerville, Mr. Parker, whether you wanted to make any comments on the detail of those at this stage. If you did, what we were going to suggest is that you perhaps put those in writing within, say, a week to Bob, the programme officer, and then they can be considered that in that way. They'll then come to us and we can have regard to those in our comments, which we then put to the council. Does that make sense, rather than getting into the detail of all that today, which is not really what we wanted this meeting to be about. So that's what we propose, if everybody's happy with that. Mr. Collett, I was about to call you Mr. Owen then, only because that was the name on your screen. So easily crossed out.
I'll answer to Mr. Owen today, sir, for the purposes of.
Yeah.
Is it worth just asking, and I don't put them on the spot for this particularly, and if they wish to hold their powder dry, but is Mr. Somerville or Mr. Parker aware of anything that they're proposing to put forward? I don't expect to go into today, sir, as you've just said. I'm quite happy to receive it in written format, but if there's nothing expected, it would just be useful to know that we're not expecting something, and if there is something, I mean, if they want to keep their powder dry and simply say no yet, then that's fine, but I would just ask if it's a nod or a shake of the head, which would just give us an indication. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got just a quick point, if I may, just on the modifications to the district-wide codes. So I was pleased to see the modification on page 52 that not every building in Teignbridge has to be joined up to another building, which is the subject of our discussion at the hearing. But I think there's text on page 59. The required outcome text still reflects that text, and also there's other text on page 59 requiring continuous frontage. They just need to be updated to reflect the modification on page 52. And equally, the new table at the back of the code in red text, page 106, still has the original wording. So that's yet to be modified to reflect the change on page 52. But I think that's a very minor point. But I think the change on 52 we're supportive of, because it allows for mixed development comprising detached and semi-detached housing. But that just needs to follow through to avoid confusion, so that the code is consistent on that point. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Would you be able to just put that in a brief email or whatever as well to Bob, just so that we do have that in writing. That would be helpful. And if there was anything else that occurs to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Jack, you'll obviously be leading on that side of the design code, the way we've distributed things. Was there anything you wanted to say on that, or no? Okay, that's fine. Okay, well that then deals with matter 3. We're making good progress, and so far my battery is holding out. So moving on to 4, which is the essay of the 2 design codes themselves. As I said at the beginning, I think from our point of view, we're in broad agreement with the council as to the proposal here. It's sort of referred to a number of times in the sort of schedule of correspondence, but it's perhaps most simply put Annex 3 on page 25, point 2, where it says, it is proposed to undertake further essay assessment by focusing on the key elements of each code in terms of the mandatory requirements for the district-wide code and the spatial principles, essential required outcomes of the Houghton, Barton and Bradmore design code, which will well, that's it. So I think basically say that would form be treated as policy, as if it was development plan policy and appraised in that way, and the rest of the design codes would be treated as plan supporting text to the extent to which SA would consider that. So we're happy with that approach and think that's an obvious and sensible approach. Mr. Somerville, Mr. Parker, did you have any thoughts on that? Yeah, Mr. Somerville.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I think broadly speaking, we're comfortable with that. I did just want to clarify. So I think the pages that are referenced in Annex 3. So I'm turning to the second page of Annex 3, page 26 of the document.
Yeah.
And maybe using the Houghton, Barton and Bradmore design code as the example. So that document is over 100 pages, and I think the page numbers of the sections that are indicated there are only the very early sections of the code's requirements. So the page numbers cited almost act as a summary of future requirements, but don't necessarily set out each and every requirement in full, because that's the bulk of the rest of the document. So I just wondered if the council could clarify, will it be those sections in full later in the essay that will be appraised, or is it just those summary sections?
So yeah, if I could just come in, it's mainly aimed at those summary sections we've got highlighted there, but we do look at those as well as supporting evidence. So it's what we put down there as the main context for doing the work, but obviously we do appreciate there's more information that we have to take on board as well.
Yeah, go again, Mr. Somerville.
Thank you. In which case, I'm a little concerned that that isn't considering all the requirements of the document. And I think I understand where the council's coming from, but just to perhaps give some examples. So I'm just looking through my notes. So for example, part 4 of the Bradmore and Houghton Barton code, which sits outside of any of the points within that scope, that has a section that's titled Fundamental Aspects of Design and includes various headings that say development must deliver. And those requirements are fundamentally different to anything that is in either of the codes or the generic development management policies. So to me, that is an absolute requirement and needs to be tested as such, as if it were policy, if the plan is to propose the inclusion of the codes as development plan documents rather than guidance.
Could you just say again which page number that was you're referring to there?
So I mean there are various parts, but
yeah, but that specific one, just so we can.
It was part 4 of the local plan. So that's titled Part A, Fundamental Aspects of Design. And I think everything from there onwards in the document falls outside of the council's scope as set out in Annex 3. And I mean, there's a lot in there that set quite precise requirements that don't appear to be tested at the moment.
Okay, what? Oh, Ms. Luscombe.
Sorry, I'm happy for you to carry on if you want to. So I can come in a bit. I was just going to respond to Mr. Somerville.
No. I was no. If
You're happy? Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. You say what it is you wanted to say.
Okay. So the way that we'd looked at that was, I think, as Mr. Shaw just said. So on page 21, obviously you've got those sections there. So, for example, when this one that Mr. Somerville's quoted, the local engagement and stewardship section has those 5 key requirements there. The additional stuff that he's referring to is just expansion on that overarching requirement there. So in regards to stewardship, for example, the public spaces and other assets must be managed via communal stewardship arrangements for the benefit of and involving local residents. If you then scroll down to section 4, the rest of that is just adding on that detail. So I think that's where we sort of said before, the specific sort of policy element that would be required would be those 5 sort of principles under that heading of local engagement and stewardship. The rest of that sort of chapter section would be that supporting text that we would consider through the essay anyway, as adding the detail to that that policy element. You know, we're flexible. We want to get this right, so we're happy to you know, to be advised. But I think there's a danger here of essaying everything. And what we need to do is sort of it's those key policy hooks that I guess we're focusing on.
Okay, what I suggest is I take it because we're just looking at one specific example here, and there's loads of different ones on there. What I think we'll do is we'll take this away, and straight after the meeting we'll try and we'll have a talk about it ourselves, and we'll reach a view on it and set that out. I think that's probably the best way, rather than try and say here and now which it's going to be. So we'll do that, but we understand the two points. But Mr. Somerville, did you just want to say something?
No, sorry, that was my mouse just hovering over the hand. Sorry.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, we'll do that then and come back and confirm precisely which bits. So that deals with 4 then, hopefully subject to us coming back on that. In terms then of essay of possible reasonable alternatives to the design code, this Annex 3 goes on to set out what was proposed in that respect. And when we first looked at this, we sort of weren't entirely sure what was proposed. But I think actually on sort of putting it away for a few weeks and then coming back and looking at it afresh, I think we've sort of, well, I think understood what is intended, but we just want to check with that. So in effect, if I'm looking at page, I'll hold this up to the light to be able to even see it, page 28, I say I'm holding it up to the light, I'm not quite sure what light I'm holding it up to, but if we look at page 28, for example, it's got their spatial principle 1 for the Houghton, Barton and Bradmore design code, taken from the design code, and the reasonable alternative is said to be rely on policy GP2, DW2, 2 and 3 to lead on environmental and social requirements. So are we right in understanding that this is basically the reasonable alternative, saying there is no design code at all, and the design is just based on those the policies, the existing proposed policies in the plan? Is that what this reasonable alternative is? Just so we're clear on that.
That's correct, sir. That's the way we've
Right.
done it.
Okay. Right. So that's sort of fine as one reasonable alternative. We would just make the comment, though, that on each of those going down in the reasonable alternatives, the sort of second sentence of each of those, we're concerned about the second sentence of those as being part of the proposal for the essay work, because that actually, the second sentence, which for that one that I've just read out, says these would lack safeguards and sensitivity, which is contained in section 3 of the design code. Seems to be a bit that's actually doing the essay itself rather than the proposal for the essay. And obviously the essay work has to be done with an open mind, not with this is what we already think the faults of this reasonable alternative are. We know the council has that view, but obviously the essay work would have to be done without that sort of preconceived view. But okay, so we understand that as a basic alternative of basically there is no design code at all, and the plan is just relying on those policies. Our concern about that, which I think we expressed earlier on in the correspondence, is we feel it's a bit sort of all or nothing. It's either the design code in the plan as it is, or it's nothing at all. And our concern is that we think there's probably potentially a middle ground, which I think on separate point, which we don't want to get into the arguments about here, but there is the separate point that Mr. Somerville and Mr. Parker, and I think some other participants in the plan examination had said, which is, well, how about the design codes as SPD have regard, and the plan policies would say have regard to them. Now we know that that's not the council's preferred approach, and as set out in the context for this meeting, we recognise that it's not the council's preferred approach, and that we would only be able to recommend a modification to that if it was shown to be unsound in some way. That approach was shown to be unsound. But our concern is that without any assessment of it as a reasonable alternative, to our mind, it is a reasonable alternative. The NPPF talks about design codes as potentially SPD or actually part of the plan. So we do feel that it is a reasonable alternative, which we would think would probably need to be appraised through SA. In essence, as I think we'd set out earlier, right at the beginning in the email discussion, which is in essence that those policies would be changed to say not that development didn't have to be in accordance with the design code. Development should have regard to the design code, and then the design codes themselves would be in effect SPD. Now, as I say, we know the council does not see that as the preferred approach, but do you have a fundamental concern about testing that as a reasonable alternative in SA?
So if I could jump in there, as all good inspectors do, you've asked me two questions in the same way, because there's 2 points to this here, if I may. The first point, you keep saying it's the preferred option of the council. Well, obviously it is the preferred option, but also we would consider it to be the lawful option. And I think that's the key part of our stance on this. It's not just simply that we prefer A to B and it's a matter of a beauty parade. We think there will be real legal issues with the SPD. However, if you feel that it would be useful as part of the process to have an essayed version for in effect an SPD version of the design codes, and I use these in very broad brush approaches, that's not something that we would stand in the way of for the purposes of getting over the line, as well, in the sense of saying, well, look, that's the position. But we do make it clear that it's, as you said, so you said preferred quite a few times, and yes, it is our preferred option, but I think it's a little more than just a preference. It's with these things, normally when you're looking at essaying of something else. I'm trying to think of something neutral to come up with another plan sort of process. You look at a sort of your options 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it may be, and you say, well, we prefer option 2, but these are the various options. The trouble we've got here is we have as you say, the switch on. Does it exist? Does it not exist? That exists clearly. The middle ground is a more difficult one to find. But as I said, this is not something that the council on my instructions is willing to simply say, no way, we're not going to do it. If it helps and assists in your process, then it's something we can do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Somerville.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think as far as Blue and Red Row are concerned, we certainly endorse this being included as the middle approach for the purposes of SA testing. Certainly, Kevin and I have done a bit of a review as to other authorities across the country that have produced codes, either site-specific or neighbourhood plan or authority-wide design codes pursuant to the National Model Design Code. And I think it's clear from that review that it is overwhelmingly the case that these are adopted or progressed as SPDs or SPGs rather than DPDs. So we think it's absolutely right to test that, particularly as this approach is entirely endorsed within the National Model Design Code itself and the NPPF and the PPG. So we certainly think that is a necessary option to test.
Okay, right. Well, I think if the council's content to do it, or to commission it, we think it would be appropriate. So let's say we'll go down that route of testing, the SA, a reasonable alternative of the halfway house, and the alternative of the being what the current proposal is. In effect, no, not what the current proposal is, what the existing proposed reasonable alternative, which is in fact no design codes. So if you can do that, yeah, Ms. Luscombe.
Apologies, on mute. I just wanted to, I guess, flag what sort of going around my head, the question mark at the moment, which is, and this is sort of where we came to before, was to be a reasonable alternative, presumably it has to be something that is deliverable. And this is where it comes back, and not wanting to get entrenched in those legal arguments. And I hear what Mr. Somerville is saying, but we know from where we stand that because of the challenges that we've had in the past on the legality of SPDs and various councils' opinion on this matter, the NPPF is at odds with the regulations on this, and therefore if we were to go through this process, which I'm saying we're happy to do, but I'm concerned about what the outcome of that would be and where that might take us here, because we are not prepared to progress the design code as SPD, because for us it's not lawful to do so. So that's where I have this sticking point in this issue, is that yes, we can do it, but what if the SA comes out, and I'm not sure what the SA would come out and say on the basis of its SPD versus DPD, because they're still doing the same thing essentially. It's just that one is, from our perspective, lawful and the other is not. So where does this take us? Because for us it's either DPD or it doesn't exist at all. So to be reasonable, doesn't it have to be deliverable? That's I just need to sort of figure that out.
I mean, I think what I would say is SPDs are a thing, and it is very clear that they do not have development plan status, and therefore development plan policy should have regard to. So you can't absolutely require what is in them, but they obviously have some use and some purpose, because notwithstanding whatever specific lawful legal problems Teignbridge has had, they have been produced for donkey's years and are still being produced. So other authorities, and maybe even Teignbridge in relation to other matters, I don't know, have found use for them and found, but clearly they're not development plan policy either. So it just seems to us that it is a logical alternative. Now, the other point to say is obviously the outcome of SA, whatever the outcome of SA is, doesn't automatically lead to any particular form of the local plan. It is information to inform it, and the law of the SA is clear on that, isn't it? It doesn't say just because something comes out seemingly performing the best as SA that must be the adopted approach, but it should be that the decision maker makes the decision having regard to the evidence on what SA says about it, and it is perfectly lawful if the decision maker has got good reasons to do so, to choose one alternative over another, even though one might seemingly perform better on SA than the other, because there may be other particular reasons. So I don't see there's any particular issue there. But what does concern us is that at the moment we've got no SA of the design code at all, and it does appear to us that there is a reasonable alternative. We accept the point that you make about the legal difficulties you've had, but I think, let's put it this way. I think the essay work should be done, see what results say. Your argument, the council's argument that your approach is the preferred approach because it is the only legal approach, remains then as whatever the outcome of the essay work, that remains as a consideration for us to have regard to, and as does Mr. Somerville and Mr. Parker's argument that they believe that isn't the case. So that still remains there, but we have some essay information to take account as well as that. Whereas at the moment we haven't got that. All we've got is two legal arguments in effect. So that's our take on it. If you're content to do it, then we haven't. I can understand why you want to sort of get it off your chest as such, but we haven't really. It doesn't seem to be there's a fundamental disagreement about doing it. Is there anything, Mrs. Jenkins, is there anything you particularly wanted to say on that at that point, or have I?
No, I think that's covered it, provided everybody has understood that position where as we see it, which I think Mrs. Luscombe is nodding, and I've got no further points to make on that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Somerville.
Thank you, sir. I'm happy to let Mr. Collett go first. I think he beat me to it. My point is a slight follow-on to this one.
Oh, right. Okay.
It was just to say, sir, that Mr. Somerville said that this is something that has happened elsewhere. That doesn't make it right. And also, more importantly, as I understand it, I'm simply going to put this there, that there may be issues where things have been considered to be the SPD where they shouldn't have been, but time has elapsed and for other reasons things haven't been challenged. But we are dealing with a new decision, and therefore we are very conscious that we'd have to test it. I mean, I wrote the note, so I've got some skin in the game, as they say, and it's not something I took 5 minutes over. It did take me quite a bit of time, as you might imagine, not least of which is because clearly in the MPPF it does say that there is this alternative that is viable. Dare I say it, and this may get me struck down in planning terms as from God on high, but the MPPF may not be always right on everything. So it is possible that there is.
Exactly.
I take what Mr. Somerville said. I don't disagree with that, and at the risk of saying, I'm very happy to appear on behalf of Savills in other areas where they've been SPDs and argue against it, but I still stand by what I say on this. But I'm not going to go behind what's been said by Mrs. Luscombe and others, that if that's something that would assist in the process, then it's something that we wouldn't stand in the way of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Somerville.
Thank you, sir. So this is a slight follow-on point, and just exploring, I suppose, what the implications of this review might be, and it sort of becomes a secular argument about how you then consider the issues. So I have absolute sympathy with the point that I think the council raised about the potential for infinite number of reasonable alternatives and alternative design codes. So just 2 points that I wanted to explore. The first of those, I assume through this process that each code will be considered separately, because an outcome of this might be the evidence indicating that it's appropriate for one code to be taken forward in a particular way, i.e. as a DPD, and the other code could be deemed not necessary and relying on general development management policies. Is that are we?
It's a fair point, which a good point, and was one that I hadn't specifically considered as such. But I think the logic is that they're done separately. I mean, they have to be done separately to the extent that they are two separate documents. So I think, yeah, the logic is that they're done separately. I don't know if the council had thought about that, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, that's the way we'd intended to do it. Certainly they would be done separately.
Yeah. So in effect, there would be you get the essay table, don't you, with all the greens and the reds and what have you. There would be one for the district design code as the design code as it is, and one for the reasonable alternative. Well, one for the reasonable alternative of the halfway house, one for the other reasonable alternative, and then the same 3 for the other. So in effect, you end up with six tables, I think, don't you? So I think, yeah, that's the logic. Yeah. So I think that answers your question, I hope, as being yes.
It does, and the second point I was going to make was, again, this is unique to the Bradmore and Houghton Barton design code. So at the moment, that covers 2 allocation areas explicitly. So it's the adopted allocation for Houghton Barton at NA1, and it's the emerging allocation, the proposed allocation for Bradmore. And given that Houghton Barton was allocated in the previous local plan about 11 years ago, and there was no mention of a design code or the need for any further guidance at that point, and it was found sound on that basis. I suppose I question whether the conclusions could be reached differently on the basis of different geographical locations, i.e. that the code is necessary or appropriate for Bradmore, but is not necessary or appropriate for Houghton Barton, given that it was an adopted allocation and found sound previously. There was also a reference, I think, in the correspondence document to some of the other sites that sit close to this area that are not expressly required to accord with the Houghton Barton design code. So I think these were flagged by yourself in the correspondence from the inspectors as GC14, GC2 and GC20. So equally, will this process or should it be considered that these sites should also be part of this area, i.e. is it a sort of plug and play assessment across any of the areas that are considered already in the code or directly adjacent to?
Right. That gets more complicated, doesn't it? I mean, my off the top of my head, I think it applies to the whole the essay has to apply to the whole area and can't start looking at of the Houghton, Barton and Bradmore one. It can't start picking and choosing bits of it, I wouldn't have thought, because then it's really pulling the thing apart, and there's so many different variables there, I would have thought. So I would have thought it's got to be the whole. That's just saying off the top of my head. The bit about which policies in the plan would need to be changed. I mean, and how precisely how they would be changed in, and I think it's section 3 of the section the correspondence where we originally set out a sort of possible thinking on this. We identified the various policies that would need to be changed. Now, I think thinking about it, I mean, you wouldn't normally in a reasonable a reasonable alternative of plan necessary, a reasonable alternative for SA, put the precise wording of policies in and appraising this precise wording against that precise wording. I think it would be much more the generic approach of the plan would be the reasonable alternative that we're talking about here is the plan is written and the and the design codes are written such as they are SBD, and the plan is saying that development should be informed by them. Now, I don't think the actual precise words of those policies would need to be written down as such. That's my thought, because that's very clear, isn't it? What that difference is. That answers. I think that only answers part of your question, though, doesn't it? Well, this thing of I don't have I understood what you were asking?
Yes, and I actually broadly agree with you. But can I take the example a bit further and just look at the example that the council have provided in Annex 3 of the correspondence? So if I can take you to page 28.
Yeah.
And then in the reasonable alternative column, first paragraph, second sentence, these would lack the safeguards and sensitivity which is contained within section 3 of the design code. Now, firstly, I'm not sure that Houghton, Barton and NA1 and Bradmore are any more sensitive than a lot of other allocations proposed. So I don't think that justification is quite adequate. But the point I was going to raise here was the conclusions here could be different for Houghton Barton, which has already been found sound as an allocation in an adopted plan without a design code, and Bradmore as an emerging allocation that is yet to be found sound. And it's, I suppose, how this further evidence addresses the difference between those two and what implications that has for any amendments that are required thereafter. I promise I'm not trying to make this more difficult than it needs to be, but it's always been a key part of our argument that we were happy and supportive of a code to be produced for Bradmore, but that we think it is unreasonable and unjustified to add in Houghton Barton given the history and the existing SPD that's been produced on that. So that's really where I'm coming from with this point.
Okay, Mr. Collett.
Thank you, sir. I was going to remember to turn my to my speaker on. Firstly, you've already raised the issue about that sentence on page 28. I've already put it in brackets. I'm very happy if it helps Mr. Somerville to put a line through it as well. Clearly, your point on that was well made, sir, and we all nodded. But if that hadn't got through, Mr. Somerville, then apologies. But we've accepted what the inspector said, that that's obviously a comment rather than perhaps something that should be appearing on the SA in due course. So scratch that. In terms of the inclusion, which I think is the main point here, I think it's got to be, as the inspector has said, you have to inspect, it has to be the whole thing and has to be looked at, both parts of that particular, so both Houghton, Barton and Bradmore will be looked at in the round. I don't think the soundness, you say, well, there's an issue that it may be found to be unsound. Well, firstly, the soundness isn't purely on the essaying of the various design codes, and there's other issues as well. So I'm not sure that would I think if we take it out, that the difficulty in starting to take sites out and putting sites back in is that it may affect other things as well. So that would lead to we open up another rabbit hole, which I don't think any of us want to run down. So the issue, I would say, is the plan is the whole plan is that well the design parts that we're talking about here are being looked at in the totality of them, and then that's something that we can consider or reconsider should issues become apparent further down the line. But I don't think it would be right to try and see if we can segment things out at this time, because I think, as I said, somebody else could come along and say, well, this could fundamentally affect how the process was undertaken. So I think it's either all in or none, but I think we've all agreed on the in. So that would be my first thoughts on it. But I'm happy for anyone else to jump in on my team if it were to respond if they want to. But if not, then back to you, sir.
And anybody else on this point? No. Okay. I mean, I think we'll, since we're going to go away anyway and have a chat about the actual essay, or what's going to be included in the essay. We'll talk about this as well and reach a view on it. And I'm wondering, I mean, again, just speaking off my head, top of my head, which is always dangerous, but I suppose my thinking is I wonder whether this is a matter of essay here or whether this is a matter of the argument can still be made and has already been made, irrespective of what the essay says. I'm not in. Well, yeah, I don't know. We'll take it away and have a talk about it. I think that's probably the easiest thing to say, and come back. Yeah, is there any Jack, any thoughts you've got at the moment, or should we just have a talk? Yeah, okay. Right. Is there anything else then on that? Right. Okay. The 0.5c is the no design codes option, which I think we've in effect said is the council's current proposal anyway. So they're in effect one and the same. Council, you seem well, that was the original proposal, so that might as well be done as well for Barton braces. Right. Okay. So coming on to number 6, then the time frame for carrying out this essay work. Well, obviously, clearly, first of all, we need to go away and have a chat, and we would hope to get back to you either later today or by Monday at the absolute latest. We do recognise the importance of getting on with this, so we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And then obviously we then also need to get back. Well, Mr. Somerville, Mr. Parker are going to come in with their written comments. Can we say by is next Friday enough time for you to come back with your written comments to Bob on those? Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, okay, that would be great. And then we can, as soon as possible thereafter, go back to the council with what we think as to whether there need to be any adjustments to the main mods of it. And then at that point, presumably, the essay work can then be carried out. So hopefully a matter of a few weeks, and we can perhaps liaise separately on how that fits in with the essay of the other mods and whether that's concurrent with that or done in advance of that or whatever. But we can, I think, discuss that separately once we've got know the timescales for all of that, because we're aware we have to come back to you on the proposed other mods as well. So, okay, anything then on the timeframes then, or is that fairly clear? Okay. Well, I think that's it then. Is there anything else on the matter generally? No? Okay. Right, well, I'm amazed that my sort of hand-me-down ideas lasted this long. So thank you very much for all your involvement today. That's been very helpful. And as I say, even if we have to do it by carrier pigeon, Ms. Jack and I will now have a discussion about it and get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you for everybody's involvement today. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope so. Can I just say, I hope you stay safe, sir, and the storm will pass. I think
I'm not so worried about being unsafe. It's the lack of a hot cup of coffee that's my biggest problem. But anyway,
cruel and unusual punishment, sir. Cruel and unusual punishment. But it hit us about 3 o'clock this morning, sir, and it's passed. So hopefully it won't last too long for you, sir.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.